Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Nicholas Haffter von Heide, and we have back in our midst David Werden for his second in series in the Living History series. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Outstanding. Well, as we are covering an amazing discussion before this recording took place on the podcast version, roughly around an hour and a half of really amazing content regarding extended techniques, bending, even clamming different notes, and all sorts of really awesome stuff about lip structures, embouchures, and whatnot. So find the link below on International Euphonium Summit.com/David-Werden, and I'll leave the link below for that, and all the information regarding his channels and such can be found, especially at the end of this video. I'll leave a link to his channel either here or here. So you can check all the amazing content he's released. So to come back into the second in series, we're going to start off with high school, which started for him at grade 10.
Right. We didn't have the middle school concept back then. It was not a known thing. So my first high school year was grade 10, as you mentioned. That was also when I finally got a 4-valve instrument. My parents did manage to buy on time a King 4-valve instrument, and I knew a little about what the 4th valve did, but not everything. But it was a better horn than I'd had. I had a Con Director before that, which was a 3-valve student line of Cons. A nice horn by most measures, I think, but the King was just a little better, a little more robust sound, more sound out of it. It's a louder sound if you wanted to. And of course, it had the 4 valves. So I can't think what the piece was. It was a Wagner piece, I think, at one of the old transcriptions that we played. My high school band did some fairly aggressive music. And this particular piece, I remember there was a passage that started somewhere around a low F concert. So I was going to use my 4th valve for that, of course, and it was 4 valves here. We didn't have the 3 and 1 in the American instruments. So I had the 4 valve down and then 4th valve, and then it went below that a few notes. So I did what I thought was logical. I used the normal fingerings for an octave higher with those notes. And without knowing it, I stumbled face first into a limitation of a non-compensating euphonium, because I practiced it and tried to make it sound right, and it didn't. Because, of course, by the time you get down what should be a whole step, it's really more like a half step when you have a non-compensating instrument using the standard fingerings. So I decided, no, I just can't do that. It sounds bad. So I went back to playing it in the optional normal octave. And the first rehearsal, my band director yelled at me about that. He said, "You've got that 4-valve instrument. Why don't you use it?" I said, "Well, I've tried, but the notes don't sound right." And unfortunately, he didn't know why. I mean, he did not offer a suggestion or anything. And the compensating system was not widely known. This was in the 60s. So yes, they were present in America in a few places, but not in typical high schools in the Midwest. So that was an unknown thing. So I finally just sort of had to fake it and placate him for the time being. And I never did understand that until I got into college, really, what was going on with the compensating system. But otherwise, it was quite a good year for me. I was now around some really good players. Because I was the youngest person in the band then. I was at the lowest level of grade. I was hearing players who were more experienced. That was a good teaching thing. I mentioned previously that I had not had private lessons with anybody ever. We got good lessons in the band program. We got a lesson every week. They were short, perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, but we had some consultation. And in junior high school, I had, for 2 years, I had a person who was a trombone player, so he understood pretty well. And the next year, my 9th grade year, we were in a different town temporarily. And the teacher there was a piano player and flute player, and yet she taught me quite well. So I had a good foundation. Now going into high school, my band director was a trumpet player originally. So again, a good understanding of brass. So we worked out of the Arbin book, and that was very helpful to me. Helped me improve technique and a little bit about musicality, but I still didn't have some concepts real clear. So having the better players in the group helped me. One that we were talking about offline previously, before we started the recording here, was Wendy Gannett. And she came from a musical family. She was a viola player, and quite a good one, but she wanted to play in the band as well. So she took up euphonium about 2 years before this. And by the time I got there, she was already playing first chair because she was so good on it. And that was probably the first time I'd heard somebody who sounded so relaxed when she played. I had more intensity. I won't say tension because I wasn't feeling tense, but I was thinking intense as far as sound. Wendy, of course, as a string player, didn't think that way. And she also seemed to be very comfortable with what the horn wanted to do. She played in a more cooperative fashion. I played in a more forceful fashion, I'll say. So she played this piece that had a solo in it, had an arpeggio up into the semi-high register, perhaps to a G or an A flat concert. And in one of the rehearsals, she clammed the top note. I never heard her miss a note before that, but she did the normal, hit the harmonic above it first. And what struck me was it sounded nice. If I had done it, it would have sounded awkward. And it sounded wrong. I mean, she didn't mean to do it, obviously, but it didn't have any brashness about it because she was playing in a more relaxed manner overall, which was just an interesting thing to hear, a different concept than I'd had before. In this year, partly because I wasn't studying privately, I suppose, I didn't know about things like music camps, or I'd heard about Allstate, didn't really understand what it was. And the band director did not suggest I try out for it. So I didn't try out until my sophomore year. I'm sorry, my junior year. So I didn't go to Allstate that year. I probably played well enough that I would have. And then I would have heard even better players there and been in a better band overall. But our band was quite good. And as I said, we played good music. So I got good instruction there. I believe the soloist we had as our guest artist that year was, I can't think of his name. I'm not sure I knew it back then. I didn't, in fact. But he had been a trumpet soloist with the Navy band and was now retired and doing this kind of thing. He was quite good. He played Concert Etude by Gedeke, which is a piece that I know now you really should be able to double tongue. I couldn't back then. I could single tongue pretty fast. So I tried to play those fast passages. Got a little frustrated because I couldn't play as fast as he did. But I still learned the music and loved playing it. And I think for a solo that year, I can't remember what I played, but we were assigned pretty hard solos. Again, good education along the way. Moving up to my junior year, I was more used to the instrument by that time and comfortable with it. I still didn't understand the low register, but in typical man music, you didn't go down into that register where the compensating system really helps you. And our guest artist that year was Harold Brash. That was an eye-opener because Harold was euphonium soloist with a Navy band for 20 years and was now out doing it in his civilian life. He was a real live euphonium player playing on a Besson or a Boozy and Hawks, probably, euphonium. First time I heard that as well. And it changed my whole concept of sound. I didn't know what a euphonium should sound like exactly. I mean, it sounded like a pretty tone trombone, sort of. But when Harold played it, it sounded quite different. So I did adapt my tone a little bit to sound more like him. I didn't have the same horn or mouthpiece, but I could do something with my tone to sound a little darker and deeper. That was quite helpful. And I played for my solo that year, Hungarian Melodies, which is what he played as one of the pieces with our band. So again, I could hear his recording that was on his LP record that we had before he even came. And I tried to emulate that wherever I could. And that was a great experience. I heard how he interpreted the music, how he played the cadenzas and so on, which is very helpful for somebody. I consider myself a young player still at that point. I didn't have a lot of depth of experience or musicality to understand how to assemble a cadenza in the most agreeable way for the listener. But Harold helped me a lot with that. And he was a nice guy. We talked to him. I even got a publicity shot in the paper with Harold and me and the first euphonium from the other band that played with us. We had 2 high schools in town. And it looked like we were playing a trio. Well, we weren't actually, it was just a pose, but we had a good time talking with him. And Harold Brosh taught me that he never used valve oil. He simply spit on his valves, which was interesting. That was advice I chose not to follow. And I'm guessing that most instrument repair people would not encourage that today as well. But anyway, it was a good year for me. And it was my first year in All-State. So I did get to go then and hear those other players and think, wow, listen to that. They're really quite good. And impressed with the other sections as well. We played in this enormous band. We did the Morton Gould Dixie arrangement, which if you've ever played it, starts off with a whole clarinet section playing the melody down low. And it was a magnificent sound with, a gazillion clarinet players playing it very well, all in unison. It was remarkable. So that was also a good experience for me musically. Then into my senior year, we had another treat for a soloist. Doc Severinsen came to play with us. And
that's awesome.
When my band director introduced us, he played a record that Doc had out at the time, and I'd never heard a trumpet player play like that. I had records at the time of Harry James, big band trumpet player, who had a rather, you might call it a schmaltzy sound these days, sort of a loose pitch, not that he played out of tune, but just a very bendy kind of a pitch and a lot of vibrato, but really quite a player, quite a remarkable player. And one that I found out in college was the idol of our trumpet professor there. He really liked how Harry James played. So I'd heard him and I'd heard Al Hurt, who recorded at the time, but again, without demonstrating a great tone. He had a ton of technique, but not a great tone, not a great amount of sensitivity in certain passages. Doc Severinsen, on the other hand, showed me he had all these things. He had a great tone, great range, magnificent power, and really good control. So we heard him play, oh gosh, I can't think right now. I have the program somewhere. I know he played La Virgen de la Macarena, a piece I'd heard Mendez play in a totally different style. And that was a real eye-opener anyway, hearing him play. And that year as well, I was first chair in All-State, which was a good experience for me. It put me under a little more pressure than just being first chair in the high school band. But I liked that kind of pressure. I was probably the only place in my life where I was really confident was in my playing. I was not terribly good at sports. I had reasonable physical strength and so on, and reasonable speed, but just never had done much with it. So I had no confidence there, but I had pretty good confidence about my playing, so I felt good about that. That year, I think I played Sounds from the Riviera for the solo, which was quite difficult. So most of the high school playing was a good experience. The one bad experience, it was probably my junior year, was state contest, when I went and I had a piece prepared and I knew it well. It went well with the pianist. And we got there and we had a little warm-up room we used with the piano, and she gave me the B flat, and I tried to play that in tune and then tried to play an F in tune, and I'd move my slide for one, but that didn't work for the other one then. And I'd never had that happen before. I didn't know what was going on. We never figured out what it was. We had to go out and play. And for the first time at contests, I'd done them since junior high school, I got the equivalent of a C grade for playing a piece that was pretty hard, probably just because I could play the technique. But my pitch was awful, and I knew it. I just couldn't fix it. So it bothered me when I went off stage, so to speak, and went back to the warm-up room, which was a physics lab. And I got the impression there was something stuck in my horn, perhaps. So I took a long rubber hose I had on one of the fixtures in the physics table, and son of a gun, my valve oil was stuck down there. It was an oblong bottle of valve oil that had stuck just around the crook of it had fallen into the bell when I was carrying the horn, and slid around the crook just enough you couldn't see it from the bell end, but dramatically affected how the horn sounded. So I got that out, and my accompanist was great about it. She helped me chase down the judge. He let me play again, but by that time we'd run all over these hallways, and I hadn't even warmed up again when I found this. So we went back and I played. I got a B equivalent or B plus or something that time around. But so that was an interesting experience. I think it was the first time an instrument let me down, or I thought it was the instrument. But it was a good life lesson anyway. And it probably had to do with the fact that I like to swing the case as I was walking along, and I was happy-go-lucky, seemingly anyway. Just fooling around, basically. And the valve oil was loose in the case, and it found its way into the bell. So maybe there's a lesson in there for some of you, I'm not sure. But in any case, I take such things a little more seriously right now and take better care of my horn. The idea I had by my senior year, when I had to start thinking about college, was that I wanted to be a band director. I liked my band directors. I got along with them pretty well. The one I had in high school was much more gruff than any that I've had before, but he definitely was warm-hearted for his players, and he was a great band director and taught me a lot. And well, I tried his patience one day. I was teaching myself to play trombone and practicing I'm Getting Sentimental Over You over and over and over in the practice room. And he finally said, David, for God's sake, please play something else for a while. So I tried his patience then, and one other time when we were fooling around in rehearsal and shouldn't have been. But overall, it was a great experience. And later in life, when his wife had died, my ninth grade band director was a single woman, and they got married at some point later. And so my two favorite band directors actually at that point ended up being a married couple. And that was just kind of fun to hear about. Anyway, so I thought I wanted to be a band director. And I went into college, into that kind of a program. I went to the University of Iowa. And again, my family was not wealthy. The university, that was quite reasonable for in-state tuition. My father had died when I was in ninth grade, and I got some Social Security for my college education from him, basically. That was very handy to have as well. So that helped me pay for my college. I came out with only a small loan at the end of it all. And I got there, and the college loaned me a Besson to use. So that was my first experience then with a real profession. And I noticed right away that there were some intonation difficulties on it. I had to get used to things that were different, certainly, than the King that I played. I held on to the King, though. I used it for marching band for the 3 years I was in marching band. It was perfect for that. I never did enjoy marching with the Besson and tried to avoid it whenever possible. If you'll see pictures of me later from my Coast Guard time when we did parades, you'll see that I was using a 3-valve King with an upright bell, the American style horn with the valves in front, because it was so much easier to carry and manage on the march than the Besson, which was totally awkward as a marching instrument. Anyway, so there I was at the University of Iowa, and once again, surrounded by some really good players, especially for the first few months. That year, the band had worked with the State Department, and they were doing a tour of Russia and also some of Europe, but some of the rest of Europe, I should say. But Russia was a big highlight because American groups didn't go over there very often. So that was cool. And I had to audition to get into that band, and I made it. I was the third chair in the band out of 5. And the 2 players who were above me were both grad students who'd come back specifically to take their master's programs this year because of that opportunity for that great trip. So for a while, I was in learning heaven, basically, by listening to these great players. And our band director was Fred Ebbs at the time. He was, I guess, kind of a legend in the Midwest. I didn't realize at the time, but he was. And he was very interesting, especially dealing with a more mature band like that. When you've got grad students and college students in the band, there were certain times where he wanted a solo passage to sound a certain way, and he'd actually try out the whole section playing it. So in our section, he went right down the line. In this one, it was in a modern piece. Solo had a lot of expression, a lot of large dynamic changes. Not my forte at the time, but I heard the first player do it. It was wonderful. Heard the second player do it. It was wonderful. I did it okay, and then the other 2 did it. He chose the second player to actually do the solo, and that happened once for the cornet section as well. It was an interesting concept, one that I have never seen since. Certainly not in service bands. That type of thing is not done there typically. Probably because it might create some embarrassing moments that would not be appreciated for long-term happiness of your players. But the first chair player who was there had been in the Army band. He had studied with Leonard Falcone and Harold Brash, and he was an amazing trombone player and an amazing euphonium player. And I learned so much just by listening to him. We had, the band had programmed the whole second suite for the tour. So during the rehearsals, I got to hear him play that solo. And I thought, my gosh, why is he playing so loud? Because I had not been exposed to that level of playing. Now, around that time, I had to drop out of the band because I couldn't afford the trip. It was going to cost us money I didn't have. So I stayed behind in the leftover band, so to speak, and had some good experiences there as well. But the band came back then from the tour and did a concert at their home base, and I got to go hear that. And the whole second suite was on that concert. From out in the audience then, I got to hear Dick Butler was the guy's name, play that solo. And I thought, oh, that's why he did that. He played so loud. It didn't sound loud from out in the audience. It sounded very present. You could hear it, and you could hear it easily. It sounded like a solo, which it was supposed to be. So that was my first true lesson, I think, in the way you may need to do something in an exaggerated fashion in order for the audience to hear it in a normal fashion. I heard somebody compare it recently to the way stage actors put on a lot of makeup. And if you talk to them afterwards, it looks like too much. When you see them on the lights far away, it's about the right amount. So it was that kind of concept. And it took me a while still to get used to doing it myself. I was perhaps more timid as a player in some ways than I should have been, but I gradually, well, probably not till I got on the Coast Guard, actually, did I really get that under my belt to where I was comfortable with expanding my sound enough to be heard by the audience without making it sound harsh. It's a lesson I still try to teach today, to teach people to play. Oh, my favorite solo probably there was the, Introduction and Dance by Barat.
Barat, yeah.
I got a drink of water here. While I was in the Coast Guard band, we had Roger Bobo as one of our guest artists. He played that piece on his F tuba. And it was just, well, first of all, that was another one of those astounding moments when we were in this very large hall that we had. A nice concert hall, good acoustics. And he just filled the hall and made the whole hall resonate, it seemed like, with his tone. Very impressed by that. So Dan Vincent, who was the euphonium player at the time, my other euphonium player, and I both found it valuable to try and play that opening solo, the boom, 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 the way he did, with as much sound volume and as much sound intensity, with good core sound, good core tone, and a lot of vibrato. We tried to play it that same way on euphonium. Well, we couldn't quite match his sound, but it was a great experience and a great training tool to try and come as close as possible. And I think we both learned that we can actually play louder than we thought we could without getting into edge if we really worked on doing that. So I suppose, like anything else, we learned that if you practice something, you get better at it. Anyway, going back into high school, college, I mean, the experience after the band left was interesting because that same year we tried to create a wind ensemble. And I got to play in that as the only euphonium player. And that was a very interesting experience. It was typical of like the Eastman Wind Ensemble was coming into popularity around that time, or perhaps had been for a while. So playing in a smaller ensemble where you could hear yourself better and hear all the other players better was enjoyable. I liked it. Not that I also didn't enjoy playing in the large concert band. There's been a discussion on my forum lately about how many euphoniums should a concert band have. Well, our band was about 120 people, so we had 5 euphoniums, and that didn't seem like too many. And I think it wasn't for that size band. But it was so different than that experience from what I experienced for the rest of my life. Once I got on the Coast Guard, the section was, well, it was 2 or 3 players at first. The first few years, because we had some shifting around, and the assistant director was also a euphonium player, so we had split duties. But then for the rest of my career, it was 2 players. And in the bands I would I played in a while at the Sheldon Theater brass band down in Red Wing, Minnesota. I was playing tuba then because that was the opening they had. I played E flat tuba, but they, again, as a brass band, had just two euphoniums. So I've pretty much just seen two euphoniums in groups since my college days. And this discussion on the forum was a reminder of what it's like to play in an ensemble with five euphoniums. And to me, part of the concept there, and certainly what we worked for in the college ensemble, was blend and balance among the section players. So if you have five players who are not trying to outdo each other, but trying to really play as a section, you get this enormous unified sound coming out that's just what you need sometimes. Example I used was a common march, El Capitan, Sousa March. Well, I think that's the right march. Hope I got the name right. But the second time through the first strain, the euphoniums are those like that. Sorry for the pitches. Yep. So that's beautiful little counter melody. And as the only player, or as a player with two in the section, especially when we're on the wrong side of the ensemble, so to speak, if it's a curve setup and you're on this side of that curve, the bell's pointing backwards. So you really have to work to get that to come out. And we did it. I mean, we got it to come out, but it wasn't quite as loud as we wanted. And if you had five players, you could easily do that without sounding loud, but it would have all the presence that it should have. And that's how you should think of these things when you're in a large section. You need to blend and balance with the section. As part of the same discussion now, and as part of my thinking while I was in the Coast Guard, there were way too many pieces written with one euphonium part. Yes, there might be a treble clef and a bass clef part, but they were the same part. Mm-hmm. And even with two players, that created some imbalances when they'd score us maybe doubling a voice in the trombone section. Well, if you got four trombones playing three parts or four parts, depending on the music, and you throw two euphoniums out on one of those parts, it's going to throw the balance off. So what I would do is I go through sometimes and get the score out and pencil in a harmony part, or a second part, if you will, in the euphoniums. So if we're playing with the second trombone, I might pencil in either the first or the third part. So we've got harmony that supports them rather than taking over one voice of the chord. And it was more fun for us, create a little more challenge in playing. Or there was a time when we didn't have a bassoon player in the band. We normally carried two, but with people's coming and going and the way the Coast Guard was set up, you could not replace a player until one had already left. And replacing a player meant time in recruiting. They have to go through the physical and whatnot. There was no basic training, so they came right in the band, but there was still a long gap sometimes before the person showed up. Well, those gaps coincided sometime when we got to where we had no bassoon. So I played the bassoon part for a while in the band, and I'd often use a straight mute for that, depending on the part. And that was great fun. And I think I suggested in the forum discussion that if the large concert band, which is a community type band, not professional players, if they had a shortage or weakness in the bassoon or the bass clarinet part, one or two euphoniums could double that. If the basses weren't very strong, you could assign a person to double them on the higher bass part. So there are some things you can do. Otherwise, you sit in the section you're given, and you do your job. You blend with the section and you cooperate and you work with the section sometimes to try and learn to play in tune with each other and to blend with each other. Even with diverse instruments, which often will show up, you'll have a couple in a section of five. I'm guessing in most community bands, you'll have at least one, maybe two of the old American style euphoniums with the front valves and the bell pointing the wrong direction over this way. And you'll have some of the modern professional style instruments where the valves are up here and the bell points that way. Even with that disparity, though, you can learn to balance. And that's a good life lesson as well as a good musical lesson. So anyway, that's a little of the experience that got me into the Coast Guard band. Did you want me to go on and talk about getting in the band as well, that experience?
We're going to do that on our third in series with you.
Okay.
I think, that that right there was not too far of a stretch for our listeners, just because when you were when you had auditioned for the tour in Russia, you were on a panel of five euphoniums, you being on the third seat there,
Yeah,
and going into your form, talking about the community band aspect and the larger, kind of more extended versions of what communities might see. I think it really gives the the overall aspect of what is possible, and then bringing in your dynamics of the host and the sound expansion that you experienced during that time really build your musicianship.
indeed. Yeah, my favorite example of adapting yourself to the music was Fantasy on American Sailing Songs by Claire Grundman. And I can't remember the exact passage, but there was a passage we had Mark mezzo piano that was clearly background under some woodwind solos. We had to actually underplay that. The next passage was the melody with perhaps one other section, and it was Mark's solo, but at piano. So here were the levels they were talking about. The background section and the solo section were written this way, and yet you had to play them this way, come out much more in the solo section. The trick there being to come out up here, but sounding like a dynamic here in terms of the relaxed quality of sound. You didn't want to sound aggressive up here. You still had to be flowy, flowing, and relaxing your sound. So those kind of lessons are something we probably will face all our life. And I've had to work on things like that, even playing with piano. There are times when you need to adapt your tone and your style dynamically and concept wise to match what the music needs.
That's really cool because that gets into our talk before the recording started on your, which we'll cover in a separate specialized interview series, your international songs for euphonium, and those different styles that come into play for even that.
Yes, that's partly why I like using international music, is it does bring in different styles of music than just the songs we might all have grown up with. Although, come to think of it, I think even in elementary school, when I had to sing, boys those days anyway hated to sing. But when I had to sing in music class with a group, they were often foreign songs. They had English words usually, but there were songs that came from different countries. So even then, I guess I was getting a little bit of the cross culture, but we probably sounded the same on all of them anyway.
That's really awesome. I think that's a really great way to wrap up this segment. And if you are interested in finding out more information and carrying this conversation over into the podcast, which will be shortly after ending this recording series, you can find the links down below into your favorite podcast once it's listed, and at internationaleuphoniumsummit.com/David-Werden. For more information and to follow the channels. You can see David's channel either here or here. I'm not so sure. Let's see. It would probably be over here if I'm doing it correct. So, with that being said, thank you so much for joining us, David, on these amazing talks and bringing your journey alongside of the current and future euphonium students and artists to come.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm happy to give this demonstration on making short stories long. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll see everybody next time on his third in series coming soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.